Okay, let's dive into this. The winter of 2025. It wasn't just another protest in Iran. This was an uprising that shook the country to its very core. We're going to break down how this became really the biggest challenge the Islamic Republic has faced since it was founded, and what it all tells us about where things might be headed for one of the Middle East's most enduring regimes. So, here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start with just how huge this uprising was. Then, we'll dig into the economic triggers. What got people onto the streets? We'll look at the regime's brutal crackdown, the whole international angle, and wrap up with the big question: is the regime running out of road? All right, so to really get a grip on just how serious this was, we're not going to start at the beginning. No, we have to jump right into the peak of the violence. Because what we saw this winter, people are calling it the single biggest challenge to the government since the 1979 revolution. That's a huge statement. And this quote, it just cuts right to the bone. This was the harrowing reality on the ground. You had this massive wave of protest met with an equally massive government crackdown. We're talking about reports of security forces just opening fire on crowds, all while the internet was shut down to try and hide what was happening. The human cost here is just staggering. And look, getting official numbers is basically impossible. But one estimate, and this was pieced together from hospital reports by an outside group, puts the death toll at over 6,000 people. Think about that for a second. And it didn't stop with the killings. The state unleashed a wave of mass arrests. We're talking more than 10,000 people detained. This wasn't just about clearing the streets, This was a calculated, systematic effort to crush the movement from the inside out. And here's what's absolutely crucial to understand. This was not just a Tehran thing. Not at all. The protests exploded in all 31 of Iran's provinces. Every single one, from the biggest cities to the smallest towns. That just shows you how deep and widespread the anger really was. So, the big question is, how does something like this happen? A whole country erupting in protest? Well, it doesn't just come out of the blue. The roots of this firestorm go deep into an economic crisis that was pushing everyday people right to the edge. And the financial pain wasn't just a feeling. You could see it in the numbers. Look at this. In December 2025, food prices jumped 72%. 72. At the same time, the national currency, the rial, was in free fall, hitting record lows. So your savings were getting wiped out, and anything imported was becoming impossibly expensive. Now, this economic pressure hit a really key group, the bazaris. You got to understand, these are the traditional merchants, the shopkeepers. They're not just anyone. Their strikes were a huge part of what brought the current regime to power back in 1979. So when they start shutting down their shops in protest, well, that's a massive red flag for the government. And that economic spark just caught fire. The speed was incredible. Look at this timeline. It starts with a few electronics merchants in Tehran. Then, in just 4 days, it explodes. It spreads to the Grand Bazaar, then the universities get involved, and boom, it's a nationwide movement. And as the crowds got bigger, the message got bolder. It's fascinating, right? At first, people were chanting things like, "Law enforcement, support us." They were asking for help with the economy. But that quickly changed. It morphed into direct, open challenges to the supreme leader himself, with chants of death to the dictator. So you've got this massive nationwide uprising that's become a direct threat to the regime's power. What do you think happened next? The government's response was exactly what you might expect: swift, coordinated, and absolutely brutal. They threw everything they had at it to get control back. And you can see the two sides of the conflict right here. On one side, you've got the protesters using marches, strikes, online organizing. On the other side, you have the full force of the state. We're talking internet blackouts, live ammo, tear gas, and even reports of them bringing in foreign militias to help crush the dissent. It was a completely asymmetrical fight. So how does a government justify this level of violence against its own people? Well, they changed the story. The supreme leader came out and made it very clear. Protest is legitimate, he said, but this is rioting. By labeling the protesters as foreign-backed rioters and mercenaries, he basically gave the green light for the security forces to do whatever it took. But here's something that was really different this time. The protesters fought back, and they fought back hard. This wasn't like previous crackdowns where the crowds just dispersed. The result? The highest number of security forces ever killed in a protest wave in Iran. This was a clear signal that things had entered a much more dangerous, much more violent phase. Okay, so it's really important to remember that all this internal chaos, it wasn't happening in a vacuum. You have to zoom out. What was happening on the streets was really just one part of a much bigger crisis, one that involved a lot of external pressure.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. The regime itself said so. The IRGC, the powerful Revolutionary Guard, they came out and basically said, these protests, this is just an extension of the war we fought with Israel and the US back in June. They were framing this as foreign aggression, not a domestic problem.
And what analysts are talking about here is a convergence, basically a perfect storm of crises all hitting at the same time. You had military setbacks from that war, you had crushing UN sanctions snapping back into place, and you had the government pouring money into rebuilding the military instead of helping its people. All of that together, well, the explosion on the streets was almost inevitable. And then you had this thrown into the mix. The US president basically drew a line in the sand, publicly warning Iran that if they started killing their own people, they could face a direct military response from the US. That kind of threat just ratcheted up the pressure and gave the regime even less room to move.
So all of this brings us to the really big question, right? The Islamic Republic has survived so many challenges before, the Green Movement in 2009, the Maha Amini protests in 2022. Is this time different? Is this the one that could actually break it?
And a lot of experts are saying, yes, it is different. And here's why. You can use force to crush anger over a political issue, but you can't use force to fix a collapsing economy forever. The root of this uprising is deep, sustained economic pain, and you can't solve that with bullets and jail cells.
And there's a really powerful historical echo here. You have to look back at the 1979 revolution itself. Think about it. The Shah's regime didn't fall just because people were in the streets. It fell when its economic foundation crumbled, when it lost the ability to actually control things on the ground. And that's really the question that hangs over everything. Regimes don't usually collapse when they're at their most brutal. They collapse when the foundation rots away from underneath them. So with all this pressure, military, economic, social, we have to ask, is Iran finally approaching that point? Is it approaching the very limit of its endurance? That's the question this crisis leaves us with.